Father, come and look on these faces, and maybe you could see through our eyes. Words are hard to find through these changes, not just another day in a life. Somehow everything managed to turn around. Many times I try to reach you, I got no reply. And sorry just might heal us, but it's not enough. It's just a crazy world we got. Why can't we talk about it? What are we gonna do? Here lies the logic that remains today. We don't know what we're in for. There's flashing lights, no open doors, and it's sad to watch, make you cry. We're too young to die. Brothers, send a message to stand down. And you gotta hurry, for it's too late. I only wish that we had the answers. Then maybe we could save the day. And how long will this go on? We're terrified that love is gone, and it's plain to see in every heart and mind. And the words are few and seldom, hard to find. And I just look to the sky and ask you why can't we talk about it? What are we gonna do? Here lies the logic that remains today. And we don't know what we're in for. The flashing lights, no open doors, and it's sad to watch, make you cry. We're too young to die.
Birth control, individual choice, safe contraceptive methods, as well as abortions when necessary, is a fundamental prerequisite for the emancipation of women. Since the right of birth control is obviously advantageous to women of all classes and races, it would appear that even vastly dissimilar women's groups would have attempted to unite around this issue. In reality, however, the birth control movement has seldom succeeded in uniting women of different social backgrounds, and rarely have the movement's leaders popularized the genuine concerns of working class women. Moreover, arguments advanced by birth control advocates have sometimes been based on blatantly racist premises. The progressive potential of birth control remains indisputable, but in actuality, the historical record of this movement leaves much to be desired in the realm of challenges to racism and class exploitation. The failure of the abortion rights campaign to conduct a historical self-evaluation led to a dangerously superficial appraisal of Black people's suspicious attitudes toward birth control in general. Granted, when some Black people unhesitantly equated birth control with genocide, it did appear to be an exaggerated, even paranoid reaction. Yet white abortion rights activists missed a profound message, for underlying these cries of genocide were important clues about the history of the birth control movement. This movement, for example, has been known to advocate involuntary sterilization, a racist form of mass birth control. If ever women would enjoy the right to plan pregnancies, legal and easily accessible birth control measures and abortions would have to be complemented by an end to sterilization abuse. As for the abortion rights campaign itself, how could women of color fail to grasp its urgency? They were far more familiar than their white sisters with the murderously clumsy scalpels of inept abortionists seeking profit and illegality. In New York, for instance, during the several years preceding the decriminalization of abortions in that state, some 80% of the deaths caused by illegal abortions involved Black and Puerto Rican women. Immediately afterward, women of color received close to half of all the legal abortions. If the abortion rights campaign of the early 1970s needed to be reminded that women of color wanted desperately to escape the backroom quack abortionists, they should have also realized that these same women were not about to express pro-abortion sentiments. They were in favor of abortion rights, which did not mean that they were proponents of abortion. When Black and Latina women resort to abortions in such large numbers, the stories they tell are not so much about their desire to be free of their pregnancy, but rather about the miserable social conditions which dissuade them from bringing new lives into the world. In an essay entitled Marriage, written during the 1850s, Sarah Grimke argued for a right on the part of women to decide when she shall become a mother, how often, and under what circumstances. Alluding to one physician's humorous observation, Grimke agreed that if wives and husbands alternatively gave birth to their children, no family would ever have more than 3, the husband bearing 1 and the wife 2. But, as she insists, the right to decide this matter has been almost wholly denied to women. It was not a coincidence that women's consciousness of their reproductive rights was born within the organized movement for women's political equality. Indeed, if women remained forever burdened by incessant childbirths and frequent miscarriages, they would hardly be able to exercise the political rights they might win. Moreover, women's new dreams of pursuing careers and other paths of self-development outside marriage and motherhood could only be realized if they could limit and plan their pregnancies. In this sense, the slogan voluntary motherhood contained a new and genuinely progressive vision of womanhood. At the same time, however, this vision was rigidly bound to the lifestyle enjoyed by the middle classes and the bourgeoisie. The aspirations underlying the demand for voluntary motherhood did not reflect the conditions of working class women, engaged as they were in a far more fundamental fight for economic survival.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the second event in our Voices of Health series, a co-production between Voices of a People's History and 400 Years of Inequality. We're grateful you're here with us tonight to honor the voices and history of the reproductive justice movement. The Angela Davis piece you just heard from her 1981 book, Women, Class, and Race, provides a powerful analysis of the historical context for the issues surrounding the reproductive rights movement. Thank you to Jamie Swift, Executive Director of Black Women Radicals, for opening our program. When the phrase reproductive justice was coined in 1994, the Black women who spoke it wanted to find a way to represent the vast issues that accompany reproductive health in the ways they themselves, along with Indigenous women, trans people, and other women of color, had always known it to be. In this event, you will hear the voices of activists, medical professionals, artists, and ordinary women with extraordinary stories. We hope to lift up these voices and remember that this fight is for all of us. Nina Simone was born into a working class family in North Carolina and spent her life elevating the experiences of Black women. She fought for space to be the artist that she wanted to be, responding to the politics of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. This recording of 4 women, a powerful piece speaking to the legacy of slavery and the pain felt by generations of women, is performed by singer, actor, and writer Megaline Echikwonki on vocals, with Aaron A. Tribe Guillen on bass, Josh J. Sangria Ortiz on keyboard, Oliver Charles on percussion, and with Ben Harper as video and music producer, and joining on guitar.
My skin is black, my arms are long, my hair is woolly, my back is strong. inflicted again and again. What do they call me? Aunt Sarah. I don't know why they call me Aunt Sarah. My skin is yellow, my hair is long, between two worlds I do belong. My father was rich and white. He took my mother late one night. What do they call me? Saffronia. My skin is tan, my hair is fine, my hips invite you, my mouth like wine. Little girl of mine, anyone with money to buy. What do they call me? Sweet thing. They call me sweet thing. My skin is brown, my manner tough. I'll kill a motherfucker, test me. My life has been rough. I'm awfully bitter these days because my parents were slaves.
Traditions that care for the earth, lands, and water along with its people. Traveling to locations around the country where her skills are needed. In 2016, she and a group of other midwives gathered to support the protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline. The Lana Study actor and playwright who continues to elevate Indigenous voices in her work reads this interview between Carolina and journalist and broadcaster Amy Goodman.
We've come with sovereignty for Indigenous women is only going to come about through the support of women and women's health. And the same way that we defend and protect Mother Earth is the same way that we need to defend and protect women and the next generations of children being born. And that's why not only is there a fully staffed and run, volunteer-run clinic here that runs 24 hours, 7 days a week at the camp, there's also now going to be a women's space where traditional midwifery is going to be promoted and utilized to support the women here. The root of this is, actually, it goes back to, the recent history of healthcare for birth for Indigenous women in North America, in this country in particular, where, for instance, Indian Health Services had a policy of forcibly sterilizing Indigenous women. From 1973 to 1976, more than 3,000 women were forcibly sterilized, even women under the age of 21. And so that decreased, well, between the 1970s and 1980s, that decreased the birth rate for Native populations in the United States of America from 3.8% to 1.8%. So that is genocide. And that cannot continue to happen. That is genocide of Indigenous women. And just the same way that this pipeline is the genocide of our Mother Earth, and it's the genocide of the river and the water that feeds us all, that nourishes us all, just as it did in the womb. So that is why we're doing this here, to support the women, to come back from that colonization. You know, right now, Native women, this space in particular, creates the potential, the possibility that women, that we can decolonize, not just through birth, but really take us back to a place of matriarchy and respecting women in a way that we can also respect Mother Earth and not lay pipelines in her, not dig out her liver, her coal, just as they're doing in Black Mesa, Big Mountain, Sovereign Dene Nation, just as they're doing all across the country and across the globe. And right now, we're here, but we're everywhere, in your home communities. Find out who the Native folks are that are living there. Find out what they're battling. Find out what the battles are and how you can support them, because they are doing it all for all of us, for all future generations, for all the babies to come. We need this water. We need this earth to be healthy, to be beautiful for them to live in. I come from occupied Tohono O'odham land in so-called Tucson now. And there is a copper mine that's trying to take a sacred land from the Apache there called Oak Flat. So I've been involved in that issue as well. I mean, everywhere we come from, those battles are there. So I want to make that connection for the folks at home, to look around you and to find the Native people around you and the battles that they're fighting. If you can't come here, support them there.
In the early 20th century, the anarchist, activist, and writer Emma Goldman was imprisoned numerous times for the distribution of materials on birth control. Read by actor Ari Graynow, this letter was sent to the press after her arrest in 1916 to raise awareness of the cause.
My dear sir, in view of the fact that the birth control question is now dominant before the American public, I hope that you will not permit your prejudice to refuse me fair play. I have lived and worked in New York City for 25 years. But now the question involved in my arrest, which took place Friday, February 11th, and which is to be heard Monday, February 28th, is birth control, a worldwide movement sponsored and supported by the greatest men and women through Europe and America. A movement which has originated in minds of people who were both scientific and humanitarian, and which at the present time is backed by science, sociology, and economic necessity. I have lectured on birth control for years, many times in New York and other cities before representative audiences. Friday, February 4th, I again delivered this lecture in Forward Hall, New York, when 3,000 people attempted to crowd the place. As a result of this popular clamor for knowledge on birth control, another meeting was arranged for Tuesday, February 8th at the New Star Casino. Again, an eager throng attended. The meeting was orderly and everything went off as peacefully and intelligently as on all other occasions when I lecture, if not interfered with by the police. Then on Friday, February 11th, just as I was about to enter the Forward Hall, to deliver a lecture on atheism, a subject which has no bearing at all upon birth control, I was arrested, taken to a filthy station house, then hustled into a patrol wagon, rushed to the Clinton Street jail, there searched in the most vulgar manner by a coarse-looking matron in the presence of 2 detectives, a thing which would outrage the most hardened criminal. Then I was locked up in a cell until my bondsman released me on $500 bail. Now, all this was unnecessary inasmuch as I am too well known in the country to run away. Besides, one who has stood the brunt for an ideal for 25 years is not likely to run away. A summons would have been enough. But because I happened to be Emma Goldman, the whole brutality of the New York police had to be employed in dealing with me, which only goes to prove that everything else in society advances except the police department. I confess I was credulous enough to believe that some change had taken place since my last arrest in New York City, which was in 1906, but I discovered my mistake. It is hardly necessary to point out that whatever may be the law on birth control, those like myself who are disseminating knowledge along that line are not doing so because of personal gain or because we consider it lewd or obscene. We do it because we know the desperate condition among the masses of workers and even professional people when they cannot meet the demands of numerous children. It is upon that ground that I mean to make my fight when I go into court. Unless I am very much mistaken, I am sustained in my contention by the fundamental principles in America, namely that when a law has outgrown time and necessity, it must go. And the only way to get rid of the law is to awaken the public to the fact that it has outlived its purposes, and that is precisely what I have been doing and mean to do in the future. I am planning a campaign of publicity through a large meeting in Carnegie Hall and through every other channel that will reach the intelligent American public to the fact that while I am not particularly anxious to go to jail, I should yet be glad to do so, if thereby I can add my mite to the importance of birth control and the wiping off our antiquated law upon the statute.
H.E.A.L.T.H is an author, poet, and dancer born and raised in Haiti and now based in Seattle, Washington. Her work focuses on empowering and uplifting marginalized communities, especially Black trans people and BTQLG+ communities. QTPQOC birthwork director, Lucia Leandro Jimeno, reads this powerful poem on the personal histories our bodies carry.
Home is where my bones live. I carry home in my bones. Are our ancestors alive today? Why do we cling so much to a legacy and to ancestor stories, to a line, imagining an unbroken lineage of people who've come before us, of people who are like us, of people who we imagine we are home? It could be that it's easier to claim and embrace and accept and feel accepted and feel welcomed by the hypothetical, the intangible, the distant ancestor, the lineage we came from, the lines which bleed for us and teach us and love us and help us. They healed us and gave us promise, gave us potential, and gave us tools to survive our lives. I don't know that we choose ancestry over home. I think we look to ancestor as a reflection, as an extension of home. I think sometimes we conflate ancestor and ancestry and home, that they are the same, that one will be the answer to the other, that when we know our ancestors, we know our homes and will know ourselves. We'll know love and welcome and community. Are our homes our bodies? Is that peace? Is that love? Is that when we are well? when we are reunited with our bones, when we are at home in our bodies and our bones, when we are sure and we are grounded and we are steady, and we know my body moves like this is my body, belongs here. My bones will be buried next to hers and under his. Can we retrace the steps in the lineage by tracing back the bones? The bones carried across the Atlantic, bones buried in our backyards, the bones buried in our homes, the silence, the unspoken, the secret. Are we healing when we remember them as their bones? Are we healing to remember ancestors as they were remembered? A pottery maker, somebody's child, a farmer, a slave, royalty, colonizer, teacher, a dancer, thief, dressmaker, muse, priests, warriors, healers, scribes, architects, seamstresses, invalid, sick, disabled, healthy, whole, broken. I carry my ancestry in my bones. Home is where my bones live. I am the crossroads of what's come before and what is created with me and within me. When my ancestors cried and called, when their DNA met and mixed and mingled, I was the response of the cosmos. I am the covenant. I am the creation. I am the gift. I am the root. I am the meeting place, the in between, the altar, the sacrifice, the temple, the seed. My ancestry lies in my bones. My home is where I am. Here lie the bodies. Here lie the worries, the woes, the triumphs, the joys. Here lie the transcestors. Here lie their remains. I carry my ancestry in my bones, and that is a record keeping, that is a history, that is a lineage, that is a story. Home is within me. Home is where my bones live. I carry my ancestry in my bones. Home is where my bones live. Home is not in the past. Home is the now. Spirit is not the past. Spirit is the now. Ancestor is not in the past. Ancestor is now. The remains, the ancestry, the lineage, the ties, they stand unbroken, stand the test of time. Ancestors live now. They worship now. They pray now. They bless now. They protect now. They serve us now. They call us to rely on them and rejoice in them now. Home is where the heart is. Home is where my spirit inhabits. I carry my ancestor in my bones. Home is where my bones live. Ashe.
The Federal Writers Project, as a part of the WPA, collected over 2,000 oral histories with formerly enslaved people and their children in the US South between the years 1937 and 1938. This account from Nancy Angerson in the Arkansas interview, taken down by Irene Robertson, describes the brutality of forced maternity under slavery. It is read by public health scholar, lawyer, and teacher, Heather M. Butts.
I was 3 months old, they said, when I lost her. Father lived to be very old. My mother was Ella Getter, and my stepmother was Lucy Evans. My father's name was Cy Hubbard. My parents married after the war. I remember Grandma Harriet Hubbard. She said she was sold. She was a cook, and she raised my papa up with white folks. Her children were sold with her. Papa was sold too at the same time. Papa fired a steam gin. They ground corn and gin cotton. I stayed with Sam Hall's family. She was good to me. I had a small bed by the fireplace. She kept me with 2 of her own children. Some of the girls and boys I was raised up with live at Sanatobia now and have fine homes. When we'd be playing, they would take all the boys from me. Miss Fanny would say, "Poor Nancy, she ain't got no toys." Then they would put them on the floor and we would all play. Grandma lived with Papa. She was part Indian. As long as Papa lived, he sharecropped gin. We worked as long as he was able to hit a lick. He died 4 miles east out from Sanatobia on Mr. Hayshaw's place. What I told you is what I know. He said he was sold that one time. Hubbards had plenty to eat and wear. He was a boy, and they didn't want to stunt the children. Papa was a water boy and filled the holes for chopping hands. He carried a file along with them, hoeing, and would sharpen their hoes and fetch some water in their jugs. Aunt Sally, his sister, took care of the children. Papa went to war. He could blow his bugle and give all the war signals. He got the military training. Him and his friend, Charlie Grimm, used to step around and show us how they had to march to orders. His bugle had 4 joints. I don't know what went with it. From what they said, they didn't like the war and was so glad to get home. Aunt Jane Peterson, old friend of mine, come to visit me nearly every year after she got so old. She told me things took place in slavery times. She was in Virginia till after freedom. She had 2 girls and a boy with a white daddy. She told me all about how that come. She said no chance to run off or ever get off. You had to stay and take what come. She never got to marry till after freedom. Then she had 3 more Black children by her husband. She said she was the cook. Old master say, "Jane, go to the lot and get the eggs." She was scared to go and scared not to go. He beat her out there, put her head between the slip gap where they let the hogs into the pasture from the lot down back on the barn. She say, "Oh, Mrs. Whitney, this ain't right." He laughed, said she bore 3 children in a room in the same house his family lived in. She lived in the same house. She had a room so as she could build fires and cook breakfast by 4 o'clock sometimes, she said. She was so glad freedom come on, and soon as she heard it, she took her children and was gone, she said. She had no use for him. She was scared to death of him. She learned to pray and prayed for freedom. She died in Coldwater, Mississippi. She was so glad freedom come on before her children come on old enough to sell. Part white children sold for more than Black children. They used them for house girls. Times are strange. Hard too. But the way I've heard they had to work and do and go, I hardly ever do grumble. I've heard so much. I got children. I do the best I can by them. That is all I can do or say.
Gloria Steinem, a feminist writer, speaker, activist, and author, has spent her life advocating for women across the world. In this satirical essay, Steinem imagines a world where men experience menstruation, read by actor, philanthropist, and entrepreneur Damaris Lewis.
Reading Freud made me skeptical about penis envy. The power of giving birth makes womb envy more logical, and an organ as external and unprotected as the penis makes men very vulnerable indeed. But listening recently to a woman describe the unexpected arrival of her menstrual period, a red stain had spread on her dress as she argued heatedly on the public stage, still made me cringe with embarrassment. That is, until she explained that, when finally informed in whispers of the obvious event, she said to the all male audience, "And you should be proud to have a menstruating woman on your stage. It's probably the first real thing that's happened to this group in years." Laughter, relief. She had turned a negative into a positive. So, what would happen if suddenly, magically, men could menstruate and women could not? Clearly, menstruation would become an enviable, worthy masculine event. Men would brag about how long and how much. Young boys would talk about it as the envied beginning of manhood. Gifts, religious ceremonies, family dinners, and stag parties would mark the day. To prevent monthly work loss among the powerful, Congress would fund a National Institute of Dysmenorrhea. Doctors would research little about heart attacks from which men would hormonally be protected, but everything about cramps. Sanitary supplies would be federally funded and free, of course. Some men would still pay for the prestige of such commercial brands as Paul Newman tampons, Muhammad Ali's rope-a-dope pads, and Joe Namath jock shields for those light bachelor days. Statistical surveys would show that men did better in sports and won more Olympic medals during their periods. Generals, right-wing politicians, and religious fundamentalists would cite menstruation, as proof that only men could serve God and country in combat. You have to give blood to take blood. Occupy high political office, be priests, ministers, or rabbis. Male liberals and radicals, however, would insist that women are equal, just different, and that any woman could join their ranks if only she were willing to recognize the primacy of menstrual rights. Everything else is a single issue. Or self-inflict a major wound every month. You must give blood for the revolution. Street guys would invent slang. He's a three-pat man. And give fives on the corner with some exchange like, "Man, you looking good." "Yeah, man, I'm on the rag." Men would convince women that sex was more pleasurable at that time of the month. Lesbians would be said to fear blood and therefore life itself, though all they needed was a good menstruating man. Medical schools would limit women's entry. They might faint at the sight of blood. Of course, intellectuals would offer the most moral and logical arguments. Without the biological gift for measuring the cycles of the moon and the planets, how could a woman master any discipline that demanded a sense of time, space, mathematics, or the ability to measure anything at all? In philosophy and religion, how could women compensate for being disconnected from the rhythm of the universe, or for their lack of symbolic death and resurrection every month? Menopause would be celebrated as a positive event, the symbol that men had accumulated enough years of cyclical woman wisdom to need no more. And how would women be trained to react? One can imagine right-wing women agreeing to all these arguments with a staunch and smiling masochism. The era would force housewives to wound themselves every month. Phyllis Scalfly. In short, we would discover, as we should already, that logic is in the eye of the logician. For instance, here's an idea for theorists and logicians. If women are supposed to be less rational and more emotional at the beginning of our menstrual cycle when the female hormone is at its lowest level, then why isn't it logical to say that in those few days, women behave the most like the way men behave all month long? I leave further improvisation up to you. The truth is that if men could menstruate, the power justifications would go on and on, if we let them.
March Piercy has written 17 novels, 19 volumes of poetry. and is an anti-war, environmental, and feminist activist. Here in her 1980 poem, Right to Life, read by writer and multidisciplinary artist Farija Roisin.
A woman is not a pear tree, thrusting her fruit in mindless fecundity into the world. Even pear trees bear heavily one year and rest and grow the next. An orchard gone while drops few warm rotting fruit in the grass, but the trees stretch high and wiry, gifting the birds 40 feet up among inch-long thorns, broken atavistically from the smooth wood. A woman is not a basket you place your buns in to keep them warm, not a brood hen you can slip duck eggs under, not a purse holding the coins of your descendants till you spend them in wars, not a bank where your genes gather interest and interesting mutations in the tainted rain. You plant corn and you harvest it to eat or sell. You put the lamb in the pasture to fatten and haul it into the butcher for chops. You slice the mountain in two for a road and gouge the high plains for coal, and the waters run muddy for miles and years. Fish die, but you do not call them yours unless you plan to eat them. Now you legislate mineral rights in a woman. You lay claim to her pasture for grazing, fields for growing babies like iceberg lettuce. You value children so dearly that none ever go hungry, none weep, with no one to tend to them. When mothers work, none lack fresh fruit, none chew lead or cough to death, and your foster homes are empty. Every noon, the best restaurants serve poor children steaks. At this moment, at 9 o'clock, a patera is performing a tabletop abortion on an unwed mother in Texas who can't get Medicaid any longer. In 5 days, she will die of tetanus, and her little daughter will cry and be taken away. Next door, a husband and wife are sticking pins in the son they did not want. They will explain for hours how wicked he is, how he wants discipline. We are all born of woman. In the rows of the womb we suckled our mother's blood, and every baby born has a right to love, like a seedling to sun. Every baby born unloved, unwanted is a bill that will come due in 20 years with interest, an anger that must find a target, a pain that will beget pain. A decade downstream, a child screams, a woman falls, a synagogue is tortured, a firing squad is summoned, a button is pushed around, the world burns. I will choose what enters me, what becomes flesh of my flesh. Without choice, no politics, no ethics lives. I am not your cornfields, not your uranium mine, not your calf for fattening, not your cow for milking. You may not use me as your factory. Priests and legislators do not hold shares in my womb or my mind. This is my body. If I give it to you, I want it back. My life is a non-negligible demand.
Born in Los Angeles in 1925, Aiko Herzi Yoshinaga was a second-generation Japanese American. She was incarcerated at Manzanar, California, and later Jerome and Rower, Arkansas. In the 1980s, she was a pivotal force that led the Federal Congressional Commission's recommendation of a presidential apology and monetary redress for surviving Japanese American detainees. Read by actor, comedian, and elected official Christina Wong, this excerpt of Aiko's interview describes the difficulty of pregnancy and caring for a young baby in the harsh living conditions of Manzanar.
All right. First, my pregnancy. Since I was young, it was a pretty easy 9 months gestation. It would have been easier if we had not had to have our meals, 3 meals, outside of our own apartment. Our own apartment finally served as bedroom, living room, and of course, the main things we lacked were kitchen and bathroom facilities. So 3 meals a day, we had to get in line for food, and being pregnant and suffering from what most pregnant women go through, what is known as morning sickness and nauseous periods. Waiting in line for our meals during that period was very, very difficult under the conditions that existed there, the dust storms, the heat, the cold. Then when the lack of real good milk at the time, which was considered very important for pregnant women to have that, I think affected my fetus. The fetus, the embryo, a great deal. When my child was born in the camp hospital, she was born with an allergy to powdered milk that they permitted babies to have during that time. And it was not diagnosed that she had an allergy to this powdered milk and that she should have what was called at that time carnation milk in a can. I requested that for my child, but they said, no, that has to go to the army, to the men in the armed forces. And we would not be permitted to unless we could afford to send for it from outside. And of course, we couldn't do that. We were earning minimum salaries, which ran from $12 a month, $16 a month, and $19 a month at that time. $19 for the professionals, $16 for semi-skilled, for skilled, and $12 for the unskilled laborers. We could not afford to buy canned milk. So my daughter suffered tremendously. She was hospitalized in the camp, went in and out with stomach disorders because of her inability to get this milk, which of course was the lifeline for infants at the time. Most children double their weight. Most infants double their weight, birth weight, at 6 months. My child had not doubled her weight in a year. She was so sick. I was very angry and felt so responsible for my child. There's nothing at all that I could do about it. And I think the lack of this important nutrition at this time of her life has affected her whole entire life. She didn't have the basic ingredients to be a healthy person. The hospital, very sort of primitive. The doctors were mostly Japanese American doctors. The white Caucasian doctors served as supervisors, overseers. The nurses and the doctors were primarily Japanese, and they were very skillful. I'm sure, although I don't know anything about hospitals and supplies at the time, but I have read what Japanese doctors who served in the camp said, that they lacked medicine. They lacked the proper equipment to do the necessary work that they needed to do as doctors. I think that we were probably very low down on the totem pole in terms of priority as far as the government is concerned at the time.
These are the words of Dr. Silvia Ramos Cruz, a retired general surgeon, poet, writer, and women's rights activist, recently featured in the Choice Words anthology published by Haymarket Books. This Doctor Speaks, Abortion is Healthcare is read by Deborah Berger, a registered nurse and co-president of National Nurses United, NNU, the California Association of National Nurses Organizing.
Abortion. Nobody likes the word. Why not? Asked the doctor. Abortion is healthcare. She says, looking down to check the overnight tweets of trolls who call her killer, promised death. Later, at the hospital, she navigates the maze of laws conceived by scores of part-time legislators who know little about the science, ritual, real-life consequences of practicing medicine. Legislators who wage a stealth campaign against women waiving clubs of medically unsound mandates. 4, intrusive ultrasounds, 3-day waits, scripted counseling, parental consent, 12-week bans, painkillers for 20-week fetuses, and more. And when that's done, the doctor turns to what she enjoys. Talks birth control with teens, counsels women about mammograms, examines patients with high-risk pregnancies, delivers babies, screens for cancer, cuts out tumors, makes treatment plans for patients who can't even afford basic generic drugs. And once a month, she joins a handful of providers, travels to the only 2 clinics left in this vast wind-sculpted state, brings abortion services to most 1 million women and girls 16 and over. She does this because she knows abortion is healthcare.
The Manifesto of the 343 was a French petition drafted by theorist, philosopher, and political activist Simone de Beauvoir in 1971, and signed by 343 women who had the courage to say, "I've had an abortion." It was an act of civil disobedience, since abortion was illegal in France. And by admitting publicly to having aborted, they exposed themselves to criminal prosecution. Today, it is collectively read by Kimberly Gomez, Kate Hare, and Alicia Jordan Jameson.
One million women in France have abortions every year.
Condemned to secrecy, they do so in dangerous conditions. While under medical supervision, this is one of the simplest procedures.
We are silencing these millions of women. I declare that I am one of them. I declare that I have had an abortion.
Just as we demand free access to contraceptions, we demand freedom to have an abortion.
Free abortion on demand is not the ultimate goal of women's plight. On the contrary, it is but the most basic necessity without which the political fight cannot even begin.
It is out of vital necessity that women should win back control and reintegrate their bodies.
They hold a unique status in history. Human beings who, in modern societies, do not have unfettered control over their own bodies.
The scandal continues. Each year, 1,500,000 women live in shame and despair. 5,000 of us die. But the moral order remains steadfast. We want to scream.
Free abortion on demand is
immediately ceasing to be ashamed of your body, being free and proud in your body, just as everyone up until now who has had full use of it, no longer being ashamed of being a woman.
1. I will have a child if I want one, and no moral pressure, institution, or economic imperative will compel me to do so. This is my political power. As any kind of producer, I can, while waiting for improvement, put pressure on society through my production.
2. I will have a child if I want one, and if the society I will be bringing it into is suitable for me. If it will not make me a slave to that child, its nurse, its maid, its punch bag.
3. I will have a child if I want one, if society is suitable for both me and it. I am responsible for it. No risk of war, no work subject to
The battle
wars.
that has risen up around the subject of abortion goes over the heads of those it is most relevant to, women.
The issue of whether the law should be made more liberal, the issue of when abortions can be permitted, basically the issue of therapeutic abortion does not interest us because it does not concern us.
Therapeutic abortion requires good reasons to receive permission to have an abortion. To put it plainly, this means that we must earn the right to not have children.
That the decision as to whether to have them or not does not belong to us now any more than it did before.
A modification to the law allowing exceptions to this principle would do nothing other than reinforce it. the most liberal of laws would still be regulating how our bodies can be used.
And how our bodies should be used is not something that should be regulated. We do not want tolerance, scraps of what other humans are born with, the freedom to use their bodies as they wish.
We do not want a better law. We want it to be removed, pure and simple. We are not asking for charity. We want justice. There are 27 million of us here alone, 27 million citizens treated like cattle.
To fascists of all kind who admit that is what they are or lay into us, or who call themselves Catholics, fundamentalists, demographers, doctors, experts, jurists, responsible men, who we say that we have uncovered you.
We should call them assassins of the people. We should forbid them to use the term respect for life, which is an obscenity in their mouths.
There should be 27 million of us. We should fight until the end because we want nothing more than our right, the free use of our bodies.
Beginning her career as a leader of a student strike at the University of Puerto Rico, while she was a student there in the 1950s, Dr. Helen Rodriguez-Trias became the first Latina to be elected president to the American Public Health Association. A grassroots activist and organizer, she led the campaign to expose sterilization abuse in Puerto Rico, and her work was crucial in establishing reproductive rights guidelines, ensuring informed consent, and improving the quality of healthcare for women around the world. Actress Rosal Colon reads the excerpt from a 2001 interview given shortly before Rodriguez-Trias' death.
What brought me to the women's movement was the women's health movement. Women brought a feminist perspective to health issues affecting women. They examined power relationships among individuals and between individuals and systems. The very early drafts of Our Bodies, Ourselves by the Boston Women's Health Collective, which was seminal in all this, said, "We need to know our bodies. We need to know what makes us healthy and what threatens our health. And we need to negotiate or confront the healthcare system to get the best possible health from it." The movement was very diverse, but the more public positions articulated by the movement didn't include the experiences or concerns of women of color or of poor women. I went to conferences and get-togethers. One big one in Antioch was attended by several thousand women. The Third World Women, as we called ourselves then, would get together and craft a social and economic agenda. If we're gonna have a movement, it has to be about equity, about getting economic power, about ending violence against women. When we did our presentation, it turned the whole conference around, made it more concrete, and focused it on important issues. I saw this happen in many forums. The women of color would state their positions, and it would become another meeting. You really had to deal with the inequities. In 1974, we had a panel on sterilization abuse, which had to do with disrespect for women's needs, wishes, and hopes. We brought up the Ralph suit, brought on behalf of two Black allegedly retarded girls, Minnie Lee Ralph, age 12, and Mary Alice Ralph, age 14, who had been sterilized without their knowledge or consent in a federally funded program in Montgomery, Alabama. The Southern Poverty Law Center found out about the girls and interviewed the mother, who said she thought she was consenting to the girls getting contraceptive. She signed the consent form with an X because she couldn't read and write. The case went to federal court, which said there was incontrovertible evidence that sterilization abuse was taking place. Some sterilization abuse was being subsidized by the government, and enjoined H.E.A.L.T.H to come up with guidelines to prevent sterilization abuse. We got a lot of flack from white women who had private doctors and wanted to be sterilized. They had been denied their request for sterilization because of their status, unmarried, or the number of their children. Usually the doctor thought that they had too few. They therefore opposed a waiting period or any other regulation that they interpreted as limiting access. While young white middle-class women were denied their request for sterilization, low-income women of certain ethnicity were misled or coerced into them. I began to understand that we were coming to different conclusions because we were living different realities. The women's movement is heterogeneous. People have different perspectives. The women's movement has been successful only to the extent that it shares experience, finds common ground, and fights for the same thing. We need health, but above all, we need to create a grounding for healthy public policy that redresses and salvages the growing inequities. We cannot achieve a healthier us without achieving a healthier, more equitable healthcare system, and ultimately, a more equitable society.
Loretta Ross is an activist, author, and university professor with a 45-year history working in social justice movements that focus on white supremacy, human rights, and feminism. Here's a speech she gave in 2018, read by one of the most influential voices in the reproductive justice movement, Byllye Avery. A longtime advocate for Black women and reproductive health, Byllye was one of the founders of the Gainesville Women's Health Center in 1974, Birthplace in 1978, and the Black Women's Health Project in 1981, which is now known as the Black Women's Health Imperative. Byllye continues to raise her voice in defense of all women in the fight for reproductive justice.
Is the potential for an uptick in anti-abortion terrorism. Since 9/11, billions of dollars have been spent on sniffing out Islamist terrorism, while for decades, multiple presidential administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have largely neglected the white supremacist and anti-abortion movements, allowing them to proliferate and strengthen. If Roe is overturned, anti-abortionists may believe they not need to hide their threats to the remaining abortion services, just as Trump supporters believe they no longer need to hide their gutter racism. This situation requires a response that links the white supremacists and anti-abortion movements. The reproductive justice framework is especially useful to address this connection. I was one of 12 African-American feminists who came up with the concept in 1994. We demanded that activism for abortion rights expand to the human right to have children and parent them in a safe environment, a right particularly denied to poor women who are disproportionately of color because of the poverty caused by racism and misogyny. Reproductive justice helps close the gap between these siloed oppressions, combining fights against population control, white supremacy, and neoliberal policies. Because Make America Great Again beliefs contaminate all political issues. We will not succeed by isolating abortion from other human rights issues. Responding to the hydra of far-right terrorism requires this intersectional approach, which goes beyond the tactic of brandishing symbolic coat hangers. First, we have to take white supremacists seriously, on the right and on the left. While few progressives would debate the prevalence of white supremacy, even fewer admit to practicing its handmaiden, white privilege. Second, we need to address the needs of those on the front lines of reproductive health movement. Abortion clinic workers, who are often women of color, don't have their needs prioritized, including the post-traumatic stress of working under the threat of terrorist violence and often have to conceal from friends and families what they do. Third, we need intersectional monitoring of the overlap between the white supremacists and anti-abortion movements, so we can convince federal and local authorities to prosecute these activities as terrorism. We must also prioritize informing vulnerable communities of this complex threat, rather than assuming that the government will take care of it. Reproductive justice enables us to work in solidarity with movements like Black Lives Matter. For example, the same way Rosa Parks joined the board of Planned Parenthood after she ignited the Montgomery bus boycott. Parks understood intersectionality long before the term was coined. Both movements she represented faced violence through threats, arson, and murders, and she recognized a common cause. With the rising tide of neo-fascism in America, we face a familiar foe. To defeat it, we will need a unified movement for human rights and justice.
Krista DeTour penned this song, Straw House, in the early 1990s in Louisiana as a response to attacks on Roe versus Wade. Now, 30 years later, with the steady chipping away at the bricks of the hard-won legislation, Roe versus Wade is again under intense attack, and the message remains the same. Krista collaborated with musicians Destiny Muhammad, Dena Al-Safar, Marielle Barin, and Aurora DeTour to share this piece with us today.
My house is made of straw. My house is made of straw. Keep my secrets off the table and my heart under glass, 'cause there's a wolf who wants to blow me down. I built this house myself. It wasn't easy. See, I built a good straw shelf, and I lay my memoirs on it for that red letter day when the wolf turns up to blow me away. Knock, knock, knock on my door, 1, 2, 3. I know, don't have to look to see. Standard flying on my little straw tree. Soon he'll cite the revelation, speak of piggy indignations, but in his considerations, did he consider me? My body and my choice are undeniable despite his wolfy voice. And I'll decide what I will do and what I won't, because it comes down to me, and I won't be going quietly. Knock, knock, I hear, thought I won the battle all before I fear. I gotta fight it 'cause it's coming once more. Says it by the vote and show me how it's gonna go. You know he shouts it like it's so, but oh, we outnumber him, you know we do. Me and you. My old house was a brick. I was evicted 'cause the walls were strong and thick. It wasn't easy. Now the bricks are being taken to the Wolfie subdivision, but I'm ready in my straw house, and it's how the story goes, waiting for the wolf to blow. My body and my choice are undeniable despite his wolfy voice, and I'll decide what I will do and what I won't, because it comes down to me, and I won't be going quiet. No, I won't be going quietly.
I won't be going quietly.
I know I won't be going quietly.
I won't be going quietly.
I know I won't be going quietly.
I think, though,
that one thing I must say that stands out crystal clear to me was probably the most important thing I did was ask the question, what's the difference between Black women's health issues and white women's health issues? Mostly because that placed an emphasis on looking at us based on our ethnicity, our culture, our subculture, the way we were reared, the things that go on in our life and how that affects our health. And the fact that we as Black women have different perspectives. I was really perplexed by when white women got together, really most of the things they only wanted to talk about were reproductive issues. But when Black women got together and we started talking about health, we started talking about different things. We started talking about things that had to do with psychological well-being. We started talking about issues that were affecting our lives, violence, sexual abuse. But also white women were talking about these things, but they were not priorities. And reproductive health, Black women would use reproductive health services, but they were not priorities. We look at the lives of people who live on lower incomes, who struggle on lower incomes, and they have a lot to overcome. And a lot of their perspectives are not articulated. What we hear articulated are really the voices of the middle class. That's what people continue to care about, the middle class. They seem to be the largest group. They seem to be the group that's sort of in the middle and the safest group to talk about. I chose to find out from women who lived on lower incomes what the perspectives were and what they were dealing with. And it was always my belief that if we were raised, and it was always my belief that if we raised the standard of women of color and lower incomes, that we raised it for everyone. I think it's very important for younger women to gather as many of the cross-cultural reproductive health experiences of women that they can, because they need to show that this is not just something like being in charge of your fertility, your reproduction. It's not just something for American women, European women, that across all cultures from the beginning of time, this has been something that has been passed from woman to woman. And that we need to know how Asian women handle it. How do Southeast Asians handle it? How Indians handle it? How everybody handles it. So we have in our psyches a legend of how women have handled reproduction throughout the ages. And sometimes that will be what will give us the courage to give us our strength, because as we look back, we find out that these women ran into difficulties, that they ran into backlashes, that they ran into antis, but that they ran into people who were grateful for the help that they were able to give. That is important to learn about the life of the grandwives in the South and how they took care of women who had babies, how they helped women who had far too many babies and didn't want to have other babies, how they handled women who had been victims of rape, how they handled women who were victims of incest, how they worked with everything in a non-judgmental way that I think is really, there's a lesson in there for all of us. So I think, do your homework. Talk to other women. This is not necessarily something you get from books. Go up to women, start a conversation, have them talk to their relatives, wherever they are, so that we can stop having us think that this is something unique at this time that's going on. It's been going on throughout the ages, and it will continue.
What a powerful note to end on. Thank you to all of our participants and readers. We are so grateful that you share your time and talents with us. Thank you to those watching and sharing space. We hope you have left here empowered to continue lifting each other up and moving the movement forward.
Father, come and look on these faces, and maybe you you could see through our eyes. Words are hard to find through these changes. Not just another day in a life. Somehow everything managed to turn around. Many times I try to reach you, I got no reply. And sorry just might heal us, but it's not enough. It's just a crazy world we got. Why can't we talk about it? What are we gonna do? Here lies the logic that remains today. We don't know what we're in for. There's flashing lights, no open doors, and it's sad to watch, make you cry. We're too young to die. Brothers, send a message to stand down, and you gotta hurry. Father, come and look on these faces, and maybe you could see through our eyes. Words are hard to find through these changes. Not just another day in a life. Somehow everything managed to turn around. Many times I try to reach you, I got no reply. And sorry just might heal us, but it's not enough. It's just a crazy world we got. Why can't we talk about it? What are we gonna do? Here lies the logic that remains today. We don't know what we're in for. There's flashing lights, no open doors, and it's sad to watch, make you cry. We're too young to die. Brothers, send a message to stand down, and you gotta hurry, for it's too late. I only wish that we had the answers, then maybe we could save the day. And how long will this go on? We're terrified that love is gone, and it's plain to see in every heart and mind. And the words are few and seldom, hard to find. And I just look to the sky and ask you why can't we talk about it? What are we gonna do? Here lies the logic that remains today. And we don't know what we're in for. The flashing lights, no open doors, and it's sad to watch, make you cry. We're too young to die.